As the drums began beating for World War I, Britain's banks came very close to collapse as a result of their corrupt exploitation of fractional reserve banking. The threat of war causing their customers to ask for their money back took them to the brink of bankruptcy. War was declared on the 28th of July 1914. The government gave the banks breathing space by authorising capital controls. They could legally refuse to pay out in withdrawals as they saw fit. A week later came the August bank holiday, and again government stepped in. The bank holiday was extended by 3 days, and emergency negotiations began. Lloyd George, then Chancellor, did everything which was asked of him by the banks. When the banks reopened, customers who wished to make withdrawals were given newly printed legal tender Treasury Notes. These new notes were issued by the state, and backed by nothing other than the credit of the state. They were dubbed the Bradbury Pound, since they were signed by the Secretary to the Treasury, John Bradbury. There were several different designs issued. The first generation notes had to be produced quickly, and so had a rather simple design printed on one side only. From the second generation on, the designs became more complex, with the king's head and an image of George slaying the dragon, perhaps an appropriate symbol bearing in mind the logo of the City of London. As soon as the banking crisis was past, Lloyd George again did as he was told, and stopped producing any more Treasury notes. The banks, you see, pointed out that should the government continue to print these interest-free Treasury notes, they, the bankers, could not make a healthy profit from the war. But despite Lloyd George's capitulation, a precedent had been set for the first time in Britain. Today we are sold the lie that there is no money. We have to cut back, save, reduce the deficit, and yet Chairman Cameron and Chancellor Osborne are borrowing more money every year, despite the austerity. Speaking early in March, Cameron bemoaned the criticism of his and George Osborne's austerity policy.
Now, of course, there are plenty of people out there with different advice about how to fix our broken economy. Some say, cut more and borrow less. Others say, cut less and borrow more. There are some people who think we don't have to take all these tough, difficult decisions to deal with our debts. They say that our focus on deficit reduction is damaging growth, and that what we need to do is to spend more and to borrow more. It's as if they think there is some magic money tree.
In typical disingenuous style, our great leader limited the debate to those two options, cut more or borrow more. But there is a third option, national credit, and the Bradbury Pound offers a historical precedent for implementing it. In the real economy, the wealth of society lies in what it produces for itself. Real economies have real physical foundations, but Britain's real economy is more or less dead. There is no real wealth left, the foundations are almost gone. Since the end of the Second World War, we've steadily produced less and less in a betrayal of a great engineering heritage. Today, instead of a lifetime career in the industry of our choice, the majority of us are required to find jobs stacking shelves or serving coffee so that we can buy the products we stack and serve. As for the real physical foundations of our economy, those have been sold to corporations to be systematically asset stripped. Even the assets we still own are in a state of collapse. Within a year or two we will have a shortfall of energy supply, our water infrastructure continues to leak, our roads are in such disrepair that real physical damage is being done to people's cars. Our railways are in such disarray that companies find it cheaper to pay the penalties and walk away from franchises, and yet ticket prices continue to rise 10 times faster than inflation. It is nearly 6 years since the banking crisis which brought us into this great recession. In those years, so-called frontline services, including in the NHS, have been cut, yet government spending continues to rise. What are they spending the money on? Perhaps the fact that it cost Lloyds Bank £1 billion to discover that the cooperative bank didn't want to buy its branches gives us a clue to how much it costs to sell off assets. Whatever government is spending money on, it has to raise it by borrowing from private investors. Private investors charge interest when they lend governments money, and that interest has to be serviced. This is a source of Cameron's woes. The collapsing real economy means reduced tax receipts to pay the increasing amount of interest needed to finance his agenda of destruction and asset stripping. And yet, ironically, the state of our infrastructure offers us the opportunity we need to get things back on track. Government promotion of infrastructure rebuilding projects could be used to kickstart a real economy back to life. And this is where the Bradbury Pound comes in, for the Bradbury was, as we said before, backed by nothing other than the credit of the nation. When it's done right, national credit is money which is issued by government exclusively for physical production. The money gains a value based on that production rather than the amount of some arbitrary physical metal stored in a vault somewhere, or the even more arbitrary whim of the market. If there is no production, then the money created in this way is worth no more than the paper it is printed on. In other words, national credit is a promise of society to itself and the intention to carry it out. Since the money isn't borrowed from private sources, it carries no interest. For this reason, what the national credit is spent on is critical. Today we ask you to join our campaign to bring back the Bradbury in time for its centenary on the 7th of August 2014. Not to bail out the banks, not to pay off the fraudulent debt, but to kickstart a failed economy which only failed through the actions of a few politicians. That one simple action, which only took a day or two to implement the first time around, would completely transform the United Kingdom from having a debt-ridden, fear-ridden and criminally controlled economy to an economy awash with credit where the industrious and innovative British people would lawfully flourish in peace and real happiness. Our country's credit is worth, according to the Office for National Statistics, over £20 trillion. We are a wealthy nation with a huge potential. So let's harness it and show the world what could be achieved. The truth is out, the historical precedent is there for all to see. Let's get out there and empower the nation to restore the Bradbury pound.